Okay. Do you want me to go ahead and get started?
Yeah, Erin, you can kick us off.
Okay. Yeah, I was like, I have no idea. I was like, trying to make sure I had the handoff for you guys. You said what you needed to.
Appreciate it. Yes, Erin, thank you so much for joining us, and would love for you to go
Yeah,
ahead and kick
yeah,
us
we'll get
off.
we'll get started. And obviously, we're recording for anybody that joins later or misses it from your team. So, hey guys, it was so nice to meet you. Today, we're going to be talking about going from AI mockups to market ready, and most importantly, navigating the design gap. So, we've all probably dabbled in AI tools for various parts of our product workflows, both as startups or perhaps as product teams embedded in larger organizations. But the reality is, going from AI mockup to market ready has a lot of challenges, even if something maybe looks good first impression. So we're going to dig into that today from a few different perspectives, both my broad experience, a design case study from a local startup, and then we'll talk about kind of do's and don'ts and next steps that once you actually have an AI mockup. So quick intro from me. My name is Erin Stewart. I'm the founder of a team called Scenic West Design. We are a group of product and UX leaders, so kind of modeled after my general background of over 15 years of experience in the industry, a hybrid of product and UX leadership, working everything from very early stage, like pre-product startups, all the way up through Fortune 500s, and a lot of things in between. Our team today specializes in B2B SaaS. We do a lot of innovation work. Sometimes that means startups or 0 to 1, like MVP products. Sometimes that means working with innovation teams in larger organizations. And it also sometimes means helping teams navigate rolling out major new features, doing redesigns, things like that. So try to bring as much flavor as possible depending on where you're coming from today. If you're interested in grabbing the slides, you can grab them from this QR code. There'll be a PDF deck that should be the top link in there. We'll also have a link to like my LinkedIn and things like that. Feel free to shoot me questions afterwards if you have any after the conversation today. And we can send that via email too if you guys miss it. I think I have it at the end slide as well. So why are we here today? So AI has definitely made design faster, but shipping good products is still hard. And we all know that, right? That's an understatement probably. And what's cool about AI tools is it is true that founding teams or product teams can generate UI faster and differently than we could a few years ago, let alone 10 years ago. But it's still really hard to take what AI generates and turn it into a true MVP or a usable, sellable, and scalable product experience. So that's going to mean different things for us depending on if we're sort of early days pre-product market fit as a team and maybe things inherently kind of are supposed to be throwaway versus as you kind of go up market or go to market with something that needs to have a different level of standard. And it's also kind of along that journey, you want to be thinking about scalability and longevity and not creating like technical debt where maybe you don't want to have that. So today our goal is to help you bridge the design gap specifically. So we'll talk a lot about product strategy and design. We'll speak less to the engineering side. They'll try to allude to that a couple of times. And if there's anyone on the call that comes from an engineering leadership background, feel free to drop notes in the chat and maybe pause and hear your take on things as well. Real quick, I guess we can do this, Adriana, if you want, just via the chat. But curious to just kind of get some like yeses or nos from like, have you used AI tools to create mockups or prototypes yet? So we'll start with that one, pause for a second, and then I'll ask the second question as well.
Yeah, if you go to the Q&A field down there, there's a question box. And if you want to upvote everyone, there are the two questions there. If you just click that little like button, if you associate with either of those questions.
Awesome. Yeah. And then so the second one being who has tried to ship AI generated screens. So that might mean different things. So I use that kind of as a loose question. But whether you're using like a tool like Replit, that's kind of a code first AI prototyping tool or code tool, or something else. Because for us, it often means going from like a heavily AI generated design to passing it to the engineering team. And even what that workflow looks like is changing really quickly, where AI assisted coding is getting a lot better than it was 6 months ago, let's say. So I definitely see a handful of people have used AI tools for mockups, and we'll dig into what some of those tools are for those of you that are still looking to kind of learn or try new things there. And it looks like a little bit of shipping from AI generated screens. I know. So I'm based in the Nashville, Tennessee area. I realized I should have mentioned that earlier. And I know in talking to startup teams and some of the startup communities that we have local here, I definitely meet startups that are really early stage using pretty heavily like AI forward coding workflows or prototyping to code and deployment workflows, but they're kind of inherently pre-product market fit. And they also are usually expecting that at some point they're going to walk away from that and rebuild or heavily kind of shift where they're going in terms of technology team and even product team, broadly speaking. So yeah, thank you for those that chimed in on that one. So what are we going to cover today? So we'll talk a little bit about the state of AI tools for product design. So we'll share a list of tools that are popular for us that we hear a lot from teams. I'll also invite you guys to drop ones in chat that are not on the list because it's certainly not exhaustive. Then we'll look at least one AI design case study working with a startup that's Johnson City based. So Zenhammer, for those of you who might know Edwin. We did a working session back, at this point, before Startup Mountain Summit, the conference that we originally ran this workshop at, we did a working session and we went from basically just a recorded meetings transcript through to AI created designs. And if he's on the call, we'll give him a second to kind of share what happened afterwards. Otherwise, I'll recap that for you guys. But by way of that design case study, we'll also talk about like what worked well, what didn't work well, and how do you navigate that gap of what doesn't work well and what to do next, what questions to ask, who to pull in to your team, things like that. We'll also leave space at the end for some questions as well. And like I mentioned, feel free to reach out to me afterwards if there's anything that we didn't cover that you're curious to get resources for. So founders experience today. This one, so these slides are a few months old, and it's funny, I was thinking about this, was like, oh, like, is this meme still like how we all feel about vibe coding, for example, or AI assisted code? I think is kind of where we're like shifting towards our focus towards, because the tools are getting better there. So meaning more like production oriented coding. But like the truth is, I can take an AI prompt and get design outputs that look like pretty clean UI, like good for maybe not like cutting edge today, but like good for the past decade's standards. I can also maybe just be excited that there's a sense of possibility. The thing in my head could quickly show up visually. And not surprisingly, as a design leader, I'm a visual person. So, the idea that like I can put something in front of a group of stakeholders and maybe they're going to tell me 10 things wrong about it, but the type of conversation I can have with an AI generated design, whether that's a wireframe, semi-high fidelity mockup, or an interactive prototype, or even working code, it really changes the game in terms of product discovery and rapid ideation and iteration as a product team, especially in the startup scene. But it also is probably going to leave you with this false sense of done. So what I think the untrained eye, so if you're not a product, a designer, engineering expert, and you're a founder that maybe comes from a really like awesome like industry domain expertise, you've got a great customer base potentially, you really understand the pain points, but maybe some of the aspects of product design and engineering are new. You can fall into some traps where things seem better than they actually are. So this is where working with expert teams, and even if that's on a smaller fractional basis, or reaching out to free resources in your mentor community, like you guys have with Founders Forge. The reality is that like the screens may not connect well. States might be missing. Maybe there's some user flow things that are a little weird. And maybe the worst feeling as a founder is, okay, I send it to my engineering team and I think it like is pretty clear, but they asked me 100 questions, and a designer might ask those same, like lots of questions as well. And then there's the reality that if it was easy to create with AI, it probably looks generic, even if that looks good for what like good was a few years ago or 5 years ago or more. If it's easy to generate with AI, we now have this challenge of what is actual competitive differentiation. So we have to think about that. So if it's easy to do with AI, it means that somebody else can come in and repeat that or create a competitor product pretty quickly. So there's some strategic places where you would inherently not want to use AI potentially. But what that means for each team is different. So let's hit tools real quick. So this is a slide of tools that are either ones my team uses almost daily, or at least weekly, and then also ones we hear a lot. This slide has shifted over the course of 2025, various places where I speak, sometimes usually different topics each time, but this is a common slide I put in. On the left, you see LLM-focused tools. Even just sort of our preference between Claude and ChatGPT has gone back and forth over the past 12 months. So you guys probably feel the same. I feel like those are probably the most common people are familiar with. How you leverage projects, things like that. Is powerful. Also getting into things like Claude Code, or even just like the types of interactive prototypes you can create right in those LLMs is pretty interesting. You also have tools like Notebook LLM. Our team is a huge fan of this one when we do more data or user research analysis, where we only want inputs from the things we upload. And it also does a really good job of doing things like citations or referencing the sources, like where did it get it? So I can go fact check it and make sure I agree with something, or just like dive deeper in analysis in that zone. Once it surfaces, like say 100 product ideas or 10 product ideas that came out of a set of user interviews, like I'm probably still going to do my own layer of analysis and what to do next on top of that. But if you haven't checked out that one, that's the one that out of those three that sometimes people haven't used much. Would definitely encourage checking that out. And again, I would say think of it as something that's more when you don't want the broader knowledge base of like what's available on the internet, that's a good one to kind of test out. That said, across the board, you'll hear me say this a couple of times today. If you have like a paid subscription for just ChatGPT or just Claude, like a lot of these workflows that we'll touch on where I reference a bunch of different tools just to give you a sense of what can be used. You can do a lot end to end in one tool. It just may have points where like another tool would have been better, and that's just going to take trial and error. In the middle column, you have design forward tools. So everybody probably knows Figma. That is still, for better or for worse, what I would consider like the main design tool player. They do have what's called Figma Make on the AI side. It came out last year, and quite honestly, when it first rolled out, it was really lagging in the features you'd expect from other tools like magic patterns, which is less known, but one of our favorites, and I'll talk about that in a second, or like lovable, things like that. But it is getting better rapidly. So that's like, I would always tell teams, like expect that Figma will keep getting better, and they'll probably buy startups and stuff to help round out their AI feature set. But I would keep your focus there. Mermaid Chart is a diagramming tool. So we use it a lot for user flow, AI generated user flow diagrams, and then go in and do quick edits. We came to love that out of Claude used it and like kind of passed you off to that very cleanly. At different points in time over the past like few months, I've noticed like they weren't using that, and there's probably like a whole sea of like partnership games being played out in the AI landscape. So like sometimes we'll get attached to a tool and then it's not plugged into the thing that made it so powerful to us, and then we have to maybe question if that's still the right tool. But that's still one I usually mention to teams when they're doing diagram heavy work. And then Magic Patterns was a startup that got a lot of traction in the design community. And I think like they're still doing increasingly well. It's actually one that I gravitate towards when I just want to do like wireframes and put them in front of a founder and say, hey, like based on our call, like here's a few sketches, and like probably 50% of it is stuff that we might want to discard, but like what things excite you, what is not what you're expecting, and like let's have a conversation about that. And you can certainly do higher fidelity designs too, build on top of UI frameworks, things like that. If you haven't, if you are design forward and skill set or interested in that, and you haven't checked out that one, would definitely recommend it. And on the far right, you have Lovable, Replit, Cursor. This is not an exhaustive list, but more code forward AI tools. And then, of course, you have things like Claude Code, Copilot, et cetera, for more AI-assisted production coding. Cursor falls into that category as well. Replit is one that, for me personally, it hasn't ever been one that like really clicked for me, but it's one that I hear a ton in the Nashville startup community for early stage founders. So I always like to shout that out and give that context as well. We're going to kind of gloss over this next slide, but I do want to mention for anybody who's interested in user research, there is also a whole suite of AI tools for user research. I think these become more applicable when you are a larger organization and have like a team of user researchers. Our team, when we work with startups or like leaner innovation teams doing kind of rapid idea prototyping, prototype user testing to validate it, and so on. We're still using tools like UserBrain, which does have some AI features. Usertesting.com is increasingly adding features, but these kind of go like a level beyond, and they each have different flavors of what they do. So if you're curious, check those out. I think it's a fun space to kind of watch as well. Real quick before I move on, I want to bounce back to this slide. And if there is a tool that you use at least weekly that you really love that is not on this list, regardless of kind of your role or responsibilities in the product or startup world, would love to have you drop that into the chat, and we'll kind of move on, but people can kind of watch that as well. I see a couple of people mentioned Quad Coder built in a Replit environment. That's awesome. But yeah, feel free to drop any others. I think everyone's always curious to learn tools that they haven't heard of, or if if a bunch of people recommend it, it's worth maybe paying more attention to. Let's see. So just to hit on a couple high-level trends and challenges, and then we'll dive in more towards our design case study and processes and do's and don'ts. So product team AI trends and challenges. This, again, is a slide I use pretty often and just kind of update it as things progress. I think stating the obvious is that product teams are increasingly using AI to support product discovery, design, and development. It can have a productivity boost. It can help us go from 0 to 1 faster. We use it in a lot of product discovery forward work with clients. And this is maybe less true today, but if you think a year ago, the idea of like, hey, there's going to be a bunch of downstream impacts and unknowns, and we just like don't really know what those are. And we're going to have like best practices still be shaped out of that. And even like what the predominant tools are. I do feel like we're now, a lot of teams are maybe a full year into using some AI tools. Maybe the functionality and the capabilities have changed a lot. So in that respect, we still don't know the downstream impacts of like the new normal, which keeps changing. But we are starting to see some like lessons learned in terms of even just like, I think in the world of AI forward startups, we've worked with a handful of those in the past year. We've been doing AI machine learning for years, way before, the generative AI sort of movement that happened. But I would say like one thing to be mindful of as a startup is anytime you're using AI tools to get something done, if it's that easy for you to do it, it's easy for somebody to replicate it. And again, I mentioned, you'll hear me say that again, because I think that's a really important thing for founders to keep in mind. But even in terms of downstream impacts in your market landscape, we're still watching how that plays out and what sticks and doesn't. And then like what's now expected is people have a better trained eye towards what was created by AI or what's easy to rinse and repeat or just like literally build themselves in-house if they're big enough. It just shifts a lot of things about how we have to think about product and design work as well. AI, I always like to share this one, from my perspective, AI does not replace product and engineering teams, but it does shift potentially the makeup of teams and where your experts focus needs to be. So this is something we spend a lot of time talking about with longer term clients of like, okay, hey, your product team still looks the same as it did 5 years ago. And what do we need to maybe like reflect on? Where do we want to spend time experimenting or changing our processes to make the whole thing better? And shift people's expertise to where it's most impactful. So the easiest example of this is if I think back to over 15 years ago, like the beginning of my career, like, man, I could get a great job just because I knew how to design a form or code a form in HTML and CSS. And like, that's not even table stakes today as a professional. And so the idea that I would spend time like manually building, say like 20 forms for a bunch of like administrative settings in a B2B SaaS product where like, otherwise, I could maybe put in a meeting transcript and have something generated that's like 80% of the way there. And then I use my expertise to refine it, discard things that don't make sense, et cetera. Think of it that way, where it's like it makes the easy work go faster so that your experts aren't getting paid to do something that like isn't really why they're there to help your team. Also, always want to emphasize that I feel like it's pretty universal that everyone's experimenting with tools or even using them day to day. If you are a product team leader, a CEO, startup founder, things like that, really be thinking about how are you creating a culture where teams are sharing what they're doing, talking about it, doing retrospectives about it, and then like as a team making changes to processes so that it's cohesive and it's not like knowledge about AI tools get siloed or even like the way people think the same thing done is different. So just thinking about creating space for that in a team is important too. So let's hit on a couple strengths and weaknesses. So AI generated designs, again, the capabilities, what's working and doesn't work is changing fast. But in general, I would say AI is great for brainstorming, concepting, inspiration, even competitor research. If you have one idea, having it challenge you to think of other ways to or solve the same problem. And it can be good for accelerating non-designers and solo builders. You just want to like tread with caution of being conscious of give AI tools to somebody who's an expert in a domain and they can move a lot faster because they know when it's not working and they know how to react to it. If you are somebody who doesn't have a UX expertise background, like knowing that you probably need at least a little flavor of that expertise to help guide it and coach you is a good thing to have in the back of your mind. AI struggles with, and again, this is going to keep changing for the better theoretically, but struggles with things that are more strategic decisions. For me, that's not just like prioritization and roadmap planning. I mean, although it will have an opinion on that and you feed it the right inputs, you can get okay outputs as a starting point. But things like product validation, so like you can get a great AI prototype, but it may not have like a strong point of view on like, these are the most important features to have like a clean, simple MVP. Or like yes, we know that this is market ready and that it's usable, sellable, scalable, and again, validated in the market that it makes sense. People want to buy it because that's generally we're building products so people buy them and we're generating revenue for our business. It's also not going to be great. And again, the needle keeps like moving for this, but if you want to have, for whatever strategic reason, a modern cutting edge UX UI design, be mindful that AI is generating stuff that's somewhat generic and is always going to kind of lag behind in standards. So it might do a good job of building on top of well-known UI frameworks. But as we get into people interacting with AI tools and voice over interacting like on a screen and things like that, just be mindful that like what AI can produce for you might be a couple steps behind. So if you're building something that really is by design new or innovative, you have to know that like at some point you have to do that yourself. And that's kind of just the nature of innovation, right? It also can sometimes struggle with, but I expect this will keep getting better quickly, state handling, edge cases. So all the things that make something really work in the market when you throw it to real users. It might look good, but again, it's that like first cut of a prototype happy path kind of thing. You have to be mindful of the edge cases. Interaction flows, information architecture, hierarchy, same thing with that prioritization. Like you kind of need a little bit of coaching for that, so you know how to cut out the noise for things. If you have anything you would want to add to this list, feel free. Again, like drop it in the chat, can definitely be interactive there. I've got that open, so I can kind of call it out if I see anything that's particularly interesting or worth having somebody share more about. So with that, I want to jump into a case study that we did with Zenhammer. Edwin, I don't know if you're on the call. If you are, drop a note in the chat so I know you're here, and I'll throw a couple questions to you in a little bit. Okay, so Zenhammer, I know some of you guys probably know Edwin and the Zenhammer team. They're based in Johnson City, generally speaking, a construction technology startup. He has gone to market. He's done a couple pivots, really has a good understanding of the space. So we're going to kind of gloss over the details of the product itself. But one of the things I would highlight is that his understanding of his business, what's worked and doesn't, and where he needs to head was pretty clear when I met him. So I had never met Edwin before, and we did a 1-hour working session where we recorded a meeting transcript and kind of fed it through this process I'll walk you through. And then we'll talk about what works and doesn't and what to do next, all the good stuff there. But we took a specific section of his product for subcontractors and talked through what he needs to essentially redesign for it. So he knew things like he had pretty clear requirements. He was looking to enrich information presentations so general contractors at a glance had better insights, improve things like company profile information, so name, owner, licenses, insurance, bonding, especially for projects where you've already worked with that subcontractor. And then kind of probably most importantly, improve the bid request process so that when a GC has a need for a large job in a region, and maybe it's a region they don't have a deep network in even for whatever reason, but it's like a huge strategic contract, that the right subcontractors are getting recommended for that bid process, and as much of it is seamless as possible and gets them the right result quickly. So think all kind of high value add stuff. So process we ran through, and I'll recap this all at the end in like a single shot slide as well. And again, you guys have access to these slides or we can send them out again. But step one, we did that meeting recording. So think requirements gathering session. It was a little bit like intro, get to know the company, get to know where they're at. And then we dove into requirements for the subcontractor redesign. And again, Edwin did a great job in that call, bringing the right requirements and clarity that gives us the inputs that make this process work. When things are more fuzzy, and we'll talk about this a little bit more towards the end if we have time, but just in case we don't get there, I would just say if your inputs are fuzzy, it means the outputs are going to be more conceptual and not as far along. And that's fine, right? If that's like where we're at and we know that that's how we're using AI, great. But just being mindful of that. And so this case study happened to work out where it's like the outputs are pretty good. Doesn't mean they're perfect. But on the flip side, if there's a lot of unknowns and you're using it for brainstorming, that's still valuable. It's just a different mindset and different end goal and how you're going to use it, and then maybe like move past it. So for this one, we did meeting transcript to requirements docs in Notebook LM. Again, you could really use any of the tools. Ideally, I would have not just had the requirements working session, but would have also had user interviews, customer conversations, other supporting materials, especially because they're an existing product team. Then we took the requirements doc that was generated out of the meeting transcript, again, with a pretty basic prompt, but you can also like improve on your prompt if you want the requirements doc to have a certain format that kind of adheres to your team standards, things like that. There's a lot you can kind of build out over time as you perfect your own workflow. We took that requirements doc and we kind of went through a process to refine it and do user flow diagrams. So in this case, I jumped over to Claude projects. Again, the goal of this was to kind of sample as many tools as possible to kind of spark your ideas, but you can do this like with more, like all sitting in the same tool if you want to. Pros and cons for each tool, right? Or LLM. Dropped in the requirements document, asked it to ask questions of the CEO. In this case, because I was just doing this as like a sample, I answered the questions as if I was Edwin. So that's not perfect, admittedly, but did that and then said, okay, now that you have the requirements document, you have the questions that you would want to know. Now create a user flow diagram for that bid process and some of the navigating through subcontractor details in that section of their product. We generated the diagram in Claude projects, but then jumped over to Mermaid chart. At the point in time we did this back in November, the embedded in Claude like visualization of that wasn't working well. So it's like one of those things where like you might like get attached to a workflow and then something changes. And I think I mentioned this earlier, but I think there's obviously like partnership plays panning out that will just shift in time in terms of what you see embedded in different LLMs. So the moral of the story is like, don't get too attached to stuff. Always kind of have your eye at the landscape to the extent you can. But then at the end of the day, like picking the tool that works for you and kind of running with it for now, it is healthy. And then just every once in a while, you kind of want to like take the 10,000 foot view and make sure it still makes sense. But that Mermaid chart document was a .md file. It did in this workflow, it's worth calling out, like there was a syntax error. So there's a little bit of a loop to go through and fix that. But Mermaid chart self-handled that for the most part. But just know that like, if it's your first time doing like a workflow like this, like it's almost never a perfect, like I do one, then I do two, then I do three. There's always some little thing you have to tweak or you might like burn time on. And that's where you have to be honest with yourself or as a team leader. Like, is it making me faster or making me a better product strategist, engineer, leader, designer? Or is it actually just kind of creating noise? Because like the truth is like, I could do all of this workflow manually. It would take me a lot longer. But if it's not working, like jump out and do it a different way is kind of the moral of the story. Step 3, we took all of those sort of cumulative inputs and we asked Claude projects to create a prompt and supporting PRD or product requirements document to put into an AI prototyping tool or AI design tool. Now, the important thing to call out here is that a PRD is almost something our team never creates in like a formal long-winded document. It usually lives, oh, awesome. Jeff, I saw whimsical and ChatGPT replace Mermaid. So I'll literally check that out this afternoon because it was on my list. So yeah, appreciate that. But yeah, so we created some things that are inputs to other AI tools. And one of the things that our team over the past year has spent a lot of time thinking about is how do we reconfigure kickoff calls with clients, discovery workshops, requirements gathering, so that we're like automating the inputs we need to do the next step in AI. So sometimes there'll be documentation that's like, it is valuable, but it's like, we're doing it so that we can do something in AI. So you always have to kind of ask yourself like, oh, what new things do I need in that workflow that I might not have done otherwise? Because for us, usually product vision and like epic level documentation in Jira or whatever PM tool replaces a PRD because we're moving in such a fast iterative pace, especially if there's a lot of unknowns in early stage product work, that you're probably not going to have like a super long-winded rigid PRD. But for the sake of creating the AI outputs, it's an awesome thing. So it's like you spend a little time on that, AI assisted, and then you're spending a little time on design, but again, AI assisted. So it just looks a little different. In this case, we did test ChatGPT or Chat PRD, which is kind of embedded in that with a couple things, but we felt the output was better with Claude projects. So same thing there. The first time you're running a workflow like this within your own team or for yourself, testing multiple tools and just kind of learning your likes and dislikes. And those are partially personal. It's also partially like industry and context and product stage that will impact that as well. Finally, we took all of those inputs again. So specifically that prompt and that PRD, but the other context kind of built into it. But we took that prompt for the AI tool and the PRD with it and ran through Claude projects, Figma Make, and Replit to solve or solution a first draft of what their redesigned subcontractor experience should be. The highlights here, I don't have this live today, but the highlights here are that there were a lot of UI design similarities. So in some ways, seeing that cross-section, you're like, okay, these things are probably pretty standard, and maybe I like them or I don't, but like that consistency is a good sign. I usually like to look for across different tools, what things did it take different directions in, and maybe that's a conversation point with my stakeholder team. So there's even like things you can learn by it, like, okay, did it differently? Why did it do it differently? And what should I take from that? Claude projects did the best job of covering multiple UI screens on the first pass. So this is something that can get a little painful, where it's like, okay, like the landing screen for complex workflow is good, and maybe it has some things that are functional, but you end up having to like do these weird piecemeal things to get to the total. That keeps getting better and better. It's probably better now than it was in November, for example. But for the sake of this exercise and kind of super simple path like forward, we felt like Claude projects had the best output for it. Some days I would say, and we didn't end up using magic patterns for this one. I think we used it for the other case study, which we probably won't get to today. But sometimes we use magic patterns for that reason. Figma Make, I feel like, has room to grow on that. And then as you get into the more code forward tools, sometimes it'll be like, it does a good first pass of things. And then, but if you need to go iterate on one section, or you realize you're missing a couple screens that need to be in like the middle of a flow, it can get a little dicey there. So it's just like, it takes practice to learn how to navigate that, or know when to jump out and do something manually and maybe put it back into AI. So to recap this process, and it doesn't look like Edwin joined, so I'll recap some of the takeaways from our conversation that was live in November. But again, we went meeting transcript. So recorded a meeting transcript, input it into an LLM, generated requirements, took the requirements document, had it ask us questions to help refine those requirements or add clarity, then drove to user flow diagrams, and ultimately a prompt for an AI designer prototyping tool with a supporting PRD. Now, your workflow, if you pick your favorite AI design tool, the inputs might not need to be exactly that. The goal of this was also to show like, hey, these are things we would usually in a classic like discovery to design process have hit. So those deliverables at each touch point, well, we just went to the next step. The truth is, if I have a user flow diagram, I'm going to put that in front of my team, even if it's like on Slack and asynchronously, or let people comment on it, like a screenshot of it and somewhere or whatever, with live comments. Those are touch points that you probably would have gotten team input, if not even like customer and user input, and then gone to the next step. So I wouldn't necessarily recommend like going into your basement and doing this to create your next startup. But it is like a really cool exercise. And in terms of just learning these tools, I think this is a fun one where you can like come up with an imaginary scenario and like run through this exercise and just kind of learn the process and see where you think it might fit into your day-to-day work for your actual company. So what worked well, and again, in this case, we started with a great meeting conversation and general product requirements clarity, as well as user persona clarity, so understanding the customer. That input meant that the outputs of the AI were pretty good. The first pass of the user flow diagram was pretty good, and it did generate concepts really, really quickly. When we talked with Edwin's team live in November, he shared that one, like the enthusiasm that it did better than he was expecting, right? So then you share it with your team and you're excited, and you might have different reactions into the team. And Edwin had a really cool story where he shared about like sharing it with one of the designers on the team. And, the first reaction was maybe like a little shock because it's like, oh, that's the work I'm supposed to do, which is like a really human reaction to it. And he talked about he gave him space to experiment it with it, try it, review it, like critique it. Of course, it's never perfect, and that's the point of their expertise, is to help get it from 80% to 100%. But he shared, kind of enthusiastically that a couple of days later, the designer had said, "Hey, I've been testing out this workflow and like look at this other section that I used it to help us solve, and here's where I went and did my own thing." But that adoption curve and like just giving somebody space to kind of have the reactions, test it, experiment it, and also like disagree with some of it, I think is really important. So if you're managing teams, like I think that's a great sort of like food for thought story of like, how can you model this, encourage people to have space for it, and then like let the team kind of organically figure out where it fits in and doesn't, because that's a different answer for each team. What didn't really work well, so getting back to what are our gaps to be market ready and how do we solve them? We'll touch on that in a second. So we did have some incomplete like user flows or like screens specifically in the first pass of the AI design or prototyping tools. It didn't do a great job of brand design consistency, even like between like fonts, hex codes, things like that, based on a screenshot. Now, if you were building out a process for this for your team that's going to be used like longer term, you're going to do a little more legwork to have like plug in your design system or some brand guidelines or have different artifacts for that. So if I were to run this exercise with a startup in sort of this like workshop conference setting again, I would actually add a step where we captured a couple of those brand elements, because one of the things that Edwin did when I sent him like a Loom recording of like, hey, here's what I did and here's what I put out, and like just send me your feedback on it and then we'll like iterate. One of the things he sent back were like, hey, here's the right color, here's the right font. And that's a pretty easy thing to fix when you put it in like verbatim to the tools. But there's a whole kind of art of like building out your design system. And that is something that like a year ago was pretty rough, and it's getting a lot better. And that's where like that eye towards like how tools play with Figma and existing design system artifacts, or does a staying UI framework. So if you're building from 0 to 1, you're picking a UI framework and you're probably telling the AI tool you're using that. And then maybe like you're doing some brand design work outside of the tools and putting that in. So there's like a bunch of workflow things that we're kind of all still evolving on that. Lacked product validation. So like I said, we went from step 1, 2, 3, 4, like this like happy path. It's not reality at all. We would have at minimum wanted to loop the team in for feedback at most of those output steps so that the next input output is that much better. We also would have wanted to go talk to customers. Like I mentioned, we are getting into a world where you can like theoretically automate that or even use like synthetic users and things like this. And it's really cool. But if you're a startup, like the good old fashioned go talk to customers, put a prototype in front of somebody, like that's still, I think, like culturally where you would want to be landing. Lack of feature prioritization and MVP scoping. So like you're going to see some bells and whistles in there that like your engineering team might be like, well, that's going to take a long time to get like actually correct or hook it up to data integrations, APIs, things like that. So like you as a product leader, a UX leader would have to have that lens of like, okay, AI generated this, but I actually just want this 30% of the functionality to start. And how do you process that? And then it also is likely missing edge cases. So like if it's easy to do that, you know, always tread lightly there in terms of like, okay, what are the more complex scenarios in his case for subcontractors and general contractors, and what are like, you know, what's a power user and the volume of the information they're dealing with versus a new customer, and how do you get them time to value, and like all the little things that could go wrong in your product experience, really hashing those out takes time, but you can always iterate on top of your happy path to get there. We're going to skip over the second case study. That one was another great local group that did have the experience of going kind of AI forward in terms of their design and build. And whereas Zenhammer, while they had AI functionality in their product, had never used AI to do product and design and coding work. So they were kind of like dipping their toes into that. But I like that flip of like, one was AI forward in terms of how they got to the product. One wasn't, but had AI in the product, because they're kind of two different categories. But just to hit on like some of the inputs, outputs, what worked and what didn't, to add color to that like design cap from a different case study. In this case, the inputs it was an early stage startup, like pre-launch kind of thing. And so some of the goals and the inputs were a little fuzzier by nature of like, you're just so early stage. There's so many unknowns. It worked well though for directional concepting, even with those vague inputs. It just meant that what you were seeing was a bunch of ideas that would have had to go through a couple more cycles of like discovery, refinement, design work. Generates multiple ideas, facilitates the conversation. So again, if you can use AI to facilitate discovery and design conversations in a really powerful way. It's just knowing like when it's conceptual and when it's like something meant to go eventually to market, and framing that for the audience you're sharing with it, especially if you're like a design lead or product lead. And maybe you're interacting with business stakeholders. It's like their first time seeing something output by AI. It just raises a lot of questions. So that framing is really powerful. Gaps to be market ready in that case study. It like lacked functional alignment with a beta app. So it was like making some leaps forward that like we didn't have the capability to do. So that kind of like constraint or reality wasn't there. Conceptual, not final design. Again, no product validation, and like lacking that like point of view of prioritization and what do you actually must have in the product. So we're going to close out with just some highlights on navigating the design gap, and then we'll try to leave a few minutes for questions. So if you have questions, feel free to go ahead and drop them into the chat. I know I've been talking at you guys for a long time, so I really hope you guys are taking away some things you want to go try afterwards. But happy to answer questions live for a few minutes. So navigating the AI design gap. Gaps to address to be market ready. So one thing we want to talk about, we mentioned this earlier, but is having that like time and space for your team to actually do a retrospective, or you individually, if you're a team of one for now, on your existing AI assisted workflow or your workflow in terms of where are my opportunities to use AI if you're just getting started. But as you start dipping into using AI, be prepared for the idea that some things are going to work well and other things might not. And so like you want to always be having that active conversation, especially in terms of cross-pollinating point of view from the team, especially if you've got product expertise, design expertise, engineering expertise, business expertise in the room. The point of view of those all mixed together is really powerful for creating something uniquely beneficial to your team or company that can be a competitive advantage if run well. It's kind of like, I think about it as if however, decade or plus ago at this point, 15 plus years ago at this point, the idea of running like an agile team could be argued as a competitive advantage. Now it's like table stakes in a lot of respects. So, I realize like there's things to debate within that, of course, but having AI assisted workflows at this minute can still be a competitive advantage. It probably will shift towards that, like it's table stakes, everybody does it. And so it's how well you execute it. And then what like secret sauce you have on top of it is where competitive advantage still can show. Better inputs equals better outputs. We talked a lot about that. If you're an early stage startup and you're thinking, okay, I know that I need engineering help, product help, design help, but I have very little budget, or I haven't raised funds yet, or I'm bootstrapping, whatever it is, teams or groups like Founders Forge and like any startup community in any city has tons of mentor experts like me that want to help you and answer questions for you. So you can go AI heavy and kind of bootstrap stuff yourself, but just know that like at periodic checkpoints, you want to go get that extra set of expert eyes. And if you're lean on resources and don't have the luxury of hiring somebody, go out into your community and ask people, ask other founders, things like that. Because I think, especially when it comes to using AI, everyone's so curious to like learn what other people are doing, and anyone who's figured stuff out is excited to share. So take advantage of that. Build your team with AI gaps in mind, so that when it comes to things like what is your strategic differentiators for your company, and how do you have the right skill sets and knowledge there to build on top of what AI can help you do that's more standardized. I think that's important too. Investing in product validation early and often. This hasn't changed like post generative AI. It's like always something we say to any product team that's creating something net new. Talk to your customers and prospective customers regularly. And in my opinion, do not automate that with AI yet. Like use AI to help you like do faster, like the granular part of analysis, but still have your like strategic thinking like hat on and look at it yourself. Because I think just spending time with insights like that is where you identify opportunities that other companies might be missing, for example. A clearly defined product vision and set of initial customer personas up front. We didn't talk about that a lot today, but again, those inputs leading to better outputs, thinking about the core documentation you want in like your Claude project or a knowledge base that's hooked into an LLM. Obviously, there's like a whole spectrum of like the lean version of that and a more enterprise version of that. But that kind of like groundwork for product discovery and documentation becomes more important. That documentation is what's going to help you have better AI outputs. Whereas sometimes startups might be kind of fast and loose, and it's like, well, we know them, we can rattle them off, but we don't have it documented. Like stopping to document things that you want as AI inputs is important. And then finally, just thinking a little bit about if you're going to market and maybe you used AI to heavily do your UI UX and you feel good about it, and that's awesome, serves your needs today. A little bit of brand work or UX strategy up front can make a huge difference so that your outputs actually make sense and hold up in like a sales conversation. So the other thing to think about is if like, let's say you go out and work with like a brand designer, asking for deliverables that are optimized for AI context that you can upload into those prototyping and design tools is important. Now, that's still an evolving, like, what does that mean? But if you look for designers, or like if you're going to go work with a team, you want to look for one that like has an opinion on this question or is hungry to go dig in and answer it for you. Or you do your own homework and have specific requests just from trial and error, things like that. But I think that will become more standard as we go. next steps with your AI prototype. So this is just kind of reinforcing some of these gaps we talked about. But if you run this process and you get to an AI prototype you're really excited about, what do you do with it? Because it's still not quite market ready, right? So reviewing with stakeholders, customers, and advisors, identifying hypotheses or open questions and risks, things that you want to go have a research plan to validate. So that hits the third bullet point. Again, it's all about strategic clarity, and making sure that you're not building or selling or doing any sort of costly efforts, whatever that may be, even if AI saved you time somewhere. You just want to make sure it all makes sense in like a total like business model, financial model, and sellable product sense. And then also, of course, like stating the obvious, like I'm obviously biased. We do product and design work, but working with a UX designer to refine what AI created is important, or even better, having a UX lead that is helping you shepherd through like everything through the AI process means they'll know when to step out of the AI tool, fix something, create a new input, and then like keep going. And then you'll get faster and faster at it together. And if you think about it as like providing inputs that you gave the AI tool to the designer, like you would always expect questions and additional discovery work. So even that exercise of like where we stopped and asked the LLM to ask us questions means that like it's identifying gaps and you can answer them quickly. So what it sends you is going to be that much better the first or second cut of it. And if it doesn't look good, like stop and start over, write a different prompt, add some more detail, do a little research to see what other people have found work, and go from there. We talked about this a little bit, but before we hit questions from the group, how to get help. So again, local startup communities and resources, mentors from those communities are great. You can get a lot done these days with just fractional help for product UX. Maybe even like the more, if you're a team that has this sort of background, but and you have some engineering power, maybe you need like a fractional CTO. Same thing holds there. And you're looking for ones that are AI savvy and can help you learn by doing it with you or doing it for you, but modeling it is really powerful. And then ongoing user feedback. So if you use AI to create something, still just doing the old fashioned, like go put it in front of 10 potential users and really study what you're seeing. Now, there's obviously the art to good user research and the methodology of facilitating that. So it's not biased or leading them to an answer. But that's, again, like a whole another topic or conversation. So if you have questions about that, same thing, like feel free to reach out. I can point you to resources there. So with that, we'll give you guys a chance to ask any questions. Otherwise, Adriana or Isaac, feel free to share any updates or close this out while we're waiting for any of those.
I do think there's one question in the chat, Erin. Oops.
Live Q&A. It's spinning for me, so let me see. Okay, what part of your AI workflow is creating the most friction right now? Okay, I saw a couple pluses for that one, so that's a great question. Let me key back to our slide that recapped the process. So I would say, just kind of running through these, like the meeting transcript to requirements is pretty solid, right? You have to know what to ask in the live session to record it. But that's kind of like a separate conversation of like the art of like good discovery and requirements gathering. And there's tons of resources if you just search that, right? Or ask ChatGPT. Requirements doc to user flow diagrams, I think, is not bad, but you have to have a trained eye to review the output to know if you need to stop and make changes or like really go back and have another requirements gathering session. Again, that adds into that, like having the right inputs of like product vision, customer personas, things like that. Honestly, that top of funnel becomes a friction point because everything else is garbage if garbage in, garbage out, right? So I'd say that is one that comes to mind. And then towards the end, getting into the prototyping tools, the handoffs from, okay, the AI tool got it pretty far. I need to go do my like 20%, 10% changes. The goal is to like have as little as possible that needs work. But the workflows for everybody to navigate, how do I go make those edits and not kind of get stuck in loops with the AI tools or like just have friction where you have to go out of a tool and back into it. I think that's where I hear the most like burning pain points for like design leads, experts, things like that. but it's getting better so much faster. So part of that is just like knowing it's coming and thinking about what would you want it to do, and then sort of keeping tabs on what's shaping up. Feel free, if there's any like follow-up question to that or anything I didn't hit, obviously drop that in, because I think that's a great question, and it's just going to keep changing. But the inputs up front, and then the like knowing how to take an output and like iterate on it is probably the main things that come to mind. Let's see. Double checking chat. Okay, cool. I don't know, Adriana or Isaac, do you guys want to do any other final shout outs or anything as we wrap up?
Sure, I can wrap this up. Thanks, everyone. Sorry about my mic issue earlier. I have no idea what was going on. But thank you again for being a part of this. We're really appreciative of Erin and all she did for us for the Start of Mountain Summit. She was an awesome speaker, and we were just really excited to have her back. One thing I will shout out is if you're local, we are having a Startup Founders After 5, which is just a local networking group that we've started. It's going to be at Johnson City Brewing tomorrow from 5:30 to 7. If you're interested in the Startup Mountain Summit, we'll be announcing dates very soon, so stay tuned for that. But thank you again for being a part of it. And thank you, Erin. We're really, really appreciative. And if you have anything else, that's all right. But we'll be good. We're good to go. So.
Oh, Erin, I think you're on mute.
Oh, sorry. Thank you. I was saying, hey guys, I saw like Garrett and I think Donnie drop in. Thanks for joining. Those are non-Eastern Tennessee friends, so always good to broaden the community. All right, thanks guys. I'm gonna drop.
Awesome. Thank you guys. Thank you everyone for joining. See you next time.